it is not just with regard to Netflix that the cultural arbiters are determining what the rest of us are supposed to think. And if you question it, then you are labeled intolerant. If you question it, then you are labeled outside the bounds of moral discourse. I mean, corporations will spend literally hundreds of millions of dollars in order to convince you that something is popular that is not popular. Right now, they're trying to convince you that the trans movement, the trans rights movement, is extraordinarily popular in the United States. It is not. They're trying to convince you that the movement to drug your kids at the age of 15 with hormones and then prepare them for surgery is popular in America. It is not. They're trying to convince you that people making jokes is unacceptable. Most Americans don't believe that. And like the stubbornness with which these narratives are pursued is truly telling. And my favorite example is the WNBA. So the WNBA is not a thing. I'm sorry, it's never going to be a thing. You can't make fetch happen. It's just never going to be a thing. And the WNBA, I'm not saying that women shouldn't play basketball. Women can play basketball. But if you're going to pretend there's a massive market for women playing basketball and people watching them, you're out of your mind. And the reason you're out of your mind is because a good high school boys basketball team could beat a WNBA team. I couldn't. I suck at basketball. But a good high school boys basketball team could beat a WNBA team. And literally, it is a story in the WNBA when somebody dunks. It is not even a story when a high school player dunks in the boys' side. Hey, now, again, women can play basketball. They're more skilled than I. All of that is fine and dandy. But there is this mainline effort in the media to promote the notion that the WNBA is a thing when it is clearly not a thing. ESPN tries to cover the WNBA as though it is equivalent in interest level to any other major sport. When the WNBA's fan, singular, is just that, a fan. Right? The grand total number of people who care about the WNBA are the executives at the NBA who want to pretend that they care about gender parity while paying WNBA players $40,000 a year and NBA players $40 million a year. And the immediate families of the people in the WNBA and some very driven feminists who are apparently willing to sacrifice an evening of time to watch somebody play the four corners offense, essentially. Okay, so this was made humiliatingly clear yesterday. So the Chicago Sky, apparently they're a team in a league that exists. Yeah, didn't really know or care, really, because who does? So they had a championship celebration. So the championship celebration started off at the park. Is it Millennium Park, I guess, in Chicago? And some people showed up, no crowd estimates. And then they had a parade. And people were like, well, just because nobody showed up for the parade doesn't mean people didn't show up at the park. Yes, but normally when you have the Golden State Warriors win an NBA championship, people show up for the parade too. The video of the parade is deeply humiliating to the WNBA, as well it should be. And remember, the NBA subsidizes the WNBA to the tune of tens of millions of dollars every year. If you can't see this, there are buses of people going down the street, open air buses. There are 4 buses. First of all, I don't know how big this team is. There are 4 buses. No one on the street. No one. I mean, the assembled score of people cheered ecstatically as the buses passed. The assembled small group of people who could fit in a telephone booth cheered wildly. The excitement. Can you feel the excitement at the WNBA here? Can you feel it? And, wow. Palpable excitement. I mean, people haven't been this excited since the release of Ishtar. The bicyclists and the people, honest to God, the people on the top of the bus wildly outnumber the number of people who are supposedly cheering them. It's really it's an amazing sight because they've spent tens of millions of dollars over the years to try and make the WNBA happen, and it's not happening. Again, that is not a rip on the players because the players have a certain level of talent at a thing that is not marketable. I mean, sorry. And yet, there's an attempt by the culture to continue to force it down, and it just won't end. And watch, because I'm saying this, people get very angry at me because I'm merely pointing out that there is no crowd for the WNBA, and no one cares about the WNBA. It'll be like, you're a sexist. That's why you're even pointing this out. No, I'm just pointing out that there are cultural arbiters who try to tell you that things are popular that are not popular, and that things are unpopular when they are popular, right? Netflix is in real trouble because 12 people walked out of the Netflix headquarters. Netflix is in serious trouble, and you should know that next time you think about telling a joke about transness. But also, the WNBA is wildly popular. So popular, and man, people can be so pissed at you if you make fun of the fact that no one showed up for the... By the way, it's been a long-running joke that no one watches WNBA games. I mean, Norm Macdonald was making jokes about this 20 years ago. Family Guy has an episode where they show a WNBA game, and then it cuts to the fan. And it's one guy in an empty stadium. And I'm sorry, that's right, and it's hilarious. The thing about leftist views of culture is that they run up against reality, but it is also true that sometimes, not always, but sometimes if you just keep pushing and you push hard enough and you just keep pushing, eventually you shift the entire culture in your direction, which is why you get the stubbornness. Right? Normally, if you're the NBA and you run up against the hard reality that nobody wants to watch the WNBA, you just shut it down. And you're like, okay, we could use that money better elsewhere. But instead, you insist on promoting it because maybe, just maybe, you will change the landscape. All right, you keep trying it. Keep trying it. And again, the cram down from, it's a very small group of people who are trying to define the cultural taste. It's not working in the case of the WNBA because, I mean, there's just no way. I'm sorry. Like, there are certain things that rational human beings just won't do. Rational human beings don't run into traffic. Rational human beings don't jump off of 100-story buildings, and rational people don't watch WNBA games unless forced to do so. But the thing is that this sort of cultural control does have real-world consequences on a smaller scale and with regard to particular issues. So, for example, on college campuses, this continues to be a major problem. Right? It is this view, by the way, of things like the WNBA that leads to the Title IX stupidity, wherein sports is supposed to be equivalent in colleges between men and women. Like that's very silly. Right? Women's softball is not the same as men's baseball, for example. Okay, but in any case, a good example of sort of how the cultural arbiters decide things comes courtesy of MIT, according to the New York Times. Michael Powell reporting, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology invited the geophysicist Dorian Abbott to give a prestigious public lecture this autumn. He seemed a natural choice, a scientific star who studies climate change and whether planets in distant solar systems might harbor atmospheres conducive to life. Then a swell of angry resistance arose. Some faculty members and grad students argued that Dr. Abbott, a professor at the University of Chicago, had created harm by speaking out against aspects of affirmative action and diversity programs. Right? So people are making the same claim about this geophysicist, Dorian Abbott, that they're making about Dave Chappelle. He's creating harm. What was the harm? In videos and opinion pieces, Dr. Abbott has asserted that such programs treat, quote, people as members of a group rather than individuals, repeating the mistake that made possible the atrocities of the 20th century. He said he favored a diverse pool of applicants selected on merit. So that inarguable fact, which is that when you use affirmative action, you are treating people based on group characteristic rather than individual merit, which is inarguable. It is literally the purpose of affirmative action. The purpose of affirmative action is that black people historically were discriminated against. Therefore, we must affirmatively discriminate in favor of black people in applications in order to rectify the breach. He points this out and says that this cuts directly against the notion of individual merit and judges people on the basis of group, which has a very ugly history in the 20th century. And this caused the lecture to be withdrawn. He said that his planned lecture at MIT would have made no mention of his views on affirmative action, but his opponents in the sciences argued he represented a, quote, infuriating, inappropriate, and oppressive choice. On September 30th, MIT reversed course. The head of its Earth, Atmospheric, and Planetary Sciences department called off Dr. Abbott's lecture to be delivered to professors, grad students, and the public, including some top Black and Latino high school students. Robert Vanderhilst, the head of the department at MIT, said, quote, besides freedom of speech, we have the freedom to pick the speaker who best fits our needs. Words matter and have consequences. Ever more fraught arguments over speech and academic freedom on American campuses have moved as a flood tide into the sciences. Biology, physics, math, all have seen fierce debates over courses, hiring and objectivity, and some on the academic left have moved to silence those who disagree on certain questions. A few fields have purged scientific terms and names, seen by some as offensive. There is a rising call for citational justice, arguing that professors and grad students should seek to cite more Black, Latino, Asian, and Native American scholars, and in some cases, refuse to acknowledge in footnotes the research of those who hold distasteful views. That's unbelievable. So you actually have major universities now deciding whether or not you're allowed to cite a scientifically useful or innovative paper based on the race of the person who wrote this is Soviet science. This is Lysenkoism. The only type of science that is approved is the science approved by the state. Frankly, it sounds like the Nazi treatment of quote-unquote Jewish science, right? If it comes from the Jews, it can't be good science. So if it comes from this white guy, it can't be a good, innovative piece of scientific literature. That's insane. I'm not saying it's a prelude to a Holocaust. I'm saying that is a piece of anti-science propagandistic trash, and it is undeserving of any level of respect. They're literally saying that they want to refuse to acknowledge in footnotes the research of people who hold distasteful views. Normally, when you refuse to acknowledge in a footnote where you're getting a piece, that's called plagiarism. Joe Biden is quite familiar with it. But apparently, they now want you to not cite people if those people hold outside views that you don't like. I hate to break it to these people, but literally every scientist up until the last 5 minutes disagreed with them on politics. I promise you, there are things I'm sure that Einstein said that you would disagree with. So I guess you can never cite Einstein again. The decision by MIT, viewed as a high citadel of science in the United States, took aback some prominent scientists. Debate and argumentation, impassioned, even ferocious, is the mother's milk of science, they said. Jerry Coyne, emeritus professor of evolutionary biology at the University of Chicago, said, I thought scientists would not get on board with the denial of free speech movement. I was absolutely wrong, 100%. Dr. Abbott spoke of his shock when told his speech was canceled. Quote, I didn't know what to say. We're not going to do the best science that we can if we are constrained ideologically. No sooner had MIT canceled his speech than Robert George, director of Princeton's James Madison program in American Ideals and Institutions, invited him to give the speech there on Thursday, the same day as the canceled lecture. Dr. George says MIT has behaved disgracefully in capitulating to a politically motivated campaign. This is part of a larger trend of the politicization of science. And then the story took another turn this week because David Romps, a professor of climate physics at the University of California, Berkeley, announced he would be resigning as director of the Berkeley Atmospheric Sciences Center. He said he had tried to persuade his fellow scientists and professors to invite Abbott. In my view, he said, there are some institutional principles we have to hold sacred. Okay, but apparently they did not want him to. They agreed that this scientist should not be able to speak. The controversy surrounding Dr. Abbott's canceled talk speaks as well to a tension manifest in progressive circles between social justice and free speech. Some faculty members have come to see identity and racial inequities as more urgent than questions of muzzled speech. Phoebe Cohen is a geosciences professor and department chair at Williams College, one of many who expressed anger on Twitter at MIT's original decision to invite Dr. Abbott to speak. Cohen agreed Dr. Abbott's views reflect a broad current in American society. Ideally, she said, a university should not invite speakers who do not share its values on diversity and affirmative action. Nor was she enamored of MIT's offer to let him speak at a later date to the MIT professors. To me, the professional consequences are extremely minimal, she said. What? She was asked of the effect on academic debate. Should the academy serve as a bastion of unfettered speech? Here is her answer, and this is everything. Quote, this idea of intellectual debate and rigor as the pinnacle of intellectualism comes from a world in which white men dominated. That is insane. I'm sorry, that's insane. It's also racist. If the idea of intellectual debate and rigor is restricted to white people, or is a white people invention, that is the most, you know who agrees with that? David Duke. That is the most racist thing I have read today, for sure. That is insane. Intellectual rigor and debate as a pinnacle of intellectualism, if it had been up to apparently the people of color around the world, these things would be a very low priority. You mean science? And people debating idea? Wow, what a statement. But again, these are the people who hold power in a wide variety of institutions. And eventually, that will have an impact on how we live, not just at the universities, not just with regard to companies like Netflix, but the kind of content you can consume, the kind of things you are allowed to say out loud. You wonder why people are living in political fear right now? That's why people are living in political fear right now. We all know it. And this stuff has real world consequences. It's going to have political consequences as well. The left is constantly saying things like, why do you even care about this? There's this gaslighting effect. Why do you care about this? Why are you paying attention to the cultural cram-downs? After all, you don't have to pay attention until you make me pay attention. You will be made, my friend Eric Erickson suggested, you will be made to care. Hands off is not a policy that redounds to your own benefit at this point. We're in a battle for the culture and for our values. Like and subscribe to help keep our videos on the front line of the fight and top of your feed.